Thank you for joining us for CBN News Watch. I'm Ephraim Graham. As the month-long time of fasting and prayer nears an end for Muslims, Islamic terrorists are changing their tactics. They're carrying out fewer big and spectacular attacks, and instead, lone wolves from Michigan to Europe are using knives and vehicles to target fewer victims. And these attacks are getting significant media attention. Gary Lane is following this story.
The most recent terror incident happened Wednesday in Flint, Michigan. A 50-year-old Tunisian man from Canada, Amour Fatoui, attacked a police officer at Bishop Airport. He used a 12-inch survival knife like this one to stab Officer Jeff Neville.
Lieutenant Neville fought him right till the end, right until I was able to handcuff this person.
Fatoui shouted, "Allahu Akbar, God is greatest," before attacking the airport policeman.
And he made a statement something to the effect of, "You have killed people in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and we are all going to die."
Neville was taken to a Flint hospital where he was listed in stable condition. Fatoui was charged with committing an act of violence at an international airport. Terrorism charges are likely. That attack here in the U.S. came after more lone wolf strikes in France and Belgium earlier this week. In Paris, one of Europe's top summer tourist destinations, a second terrorist attack in 3 months along the Champs-Élysées. 31-year-old Adam Jaziri from the Paris suburb of Argenteuil drove a car packed with explosives into police. And in Brussels, a man was shot by police as he attempted to detonate a suitcase bomb at the central train station. The 36-year-old Moroccan national, a suspected supporter of ISIS, lived in Molenbeek. It's the Brussels neighborhood linked to past terror attacks in Paris and Brussels. In Europe and even here in the United States, officials are warning about the growing possibilities of more terrorism. And one criminology expert in Paris says people are becoming numb to all the attacks. Professor Alain Bauer compares the frequent attacks living in London and facing constant danger during the Nazi Blitz in World War II. That's when German planes repeatedly bombed innocent civilians. He said just as back then, the question is not if there will be more attacks, but when and how to endure them, with the idea that at the end, the West will win. And he said that now smaller lone wolf attacks are becoming the norm. Bauer said, quote, "We've gone from hyper-terrorism to low-intensity terrorism of proximity, with few victims but with a strong media amplification." As Europeans brace themselves for more possible terrorist attacks during the busy summer tourist season, ISIS is suffering military defeats in Syria and Iraq. When Iraqi troops closed in, ISIS acknowledged defeat in Mosul by blowing up the Grand al-Nuri Mosque. It's the same mosque where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the Islamic State Caliphate 3 years ago. Gary Lane, CBN News.
A Christian elementary school in Canada is being told it can't teach students scriptures that may be considered offensive. The board for the Alberta school has also made administrators take a Bible verse off their website and from a wall inside the school. The orders go against an agreement that allows Cornerstone Christian Academy to teach its basic tenets. The school receives state funding, and they say their freedom of religion and expression are being violated. Senate Republican leaders are prepared to release a replacement for Obamacare. Lawmakers say the plan would cut Medicaid and penalties for people who don't buy insurance and erase tax increases. President Trump weighed in on the new healthcare bill yesterday at a rally in Iowa.
If we went and got the single greatest health care plan in the history of the world, we would not get one Democrat vote because they're obstructionists. They're obstructionists.
The measure would also drop waivers that allow states to let insurers increase premiums on people with pre-existing conditions. New dashcam video has been released of a driver shot by a Minnesota police officer. Philando Castile was shot last July in a suburb of St. Paul during a traffic stop. It happened after Castile informed the police officer, Geronimo Yanez, that he had a gun. Investigators released the video from Yanez's squad car this week. The video captures what happens moments before Castile was shot.
I have to tell you, I do have a firearm on me. Don't reach for it, then. Don't pull it out. Don't pull it out.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions wants select cities to kick off a new nationwide crime-fighting initiative. Those cities would get federal resources to go directly after gangs and other criminals. CBN's national security correspondent Eric Rosales breaks down that plan. At a national gathering of law enforcement officials, Attorney General Jeff Sessions spelled out his plan to turn back the troubling increase in violent crime.
To carry out the president's executive order, in February, we established our task force on crime reduction and public safety, which includes experts across our great Department of Justice. The task force is listening to ideas from partners like you all across this country, and it is developing a complete strategy to tackle these issues, including proposals for legislation.
The Attorney General announced a new initiative to combat crime and bolster public safety by providing federal resources to help out 12 cities strategize on the best ways to fight crime.
I expect them to prioritize violent crime cases, identify the most violent people in their jurisdictions, and work with their state and local counterparts to take them off the streets. To support their efforts, we will hire 300 more assistant United States attorneys who will serve on the front lines in your districts.
This national public safety partnership will start in 12 cities and eventually expand. They include Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Birmingham, Alabama, Buffalo, New York, Cincinnati, Ohio, Houston, Texas, Indianapolis, Indiana, Jackson, Tennessee, Kansas City, Missouri, Lansing, Michigan, Memphis, Tennessee, Springfield, Illinois, and Toledo, Ohio. The Attorney General says federal and local law enforcement will work side by side with a concentration on gun crime, drug trafficking, and gang violence. Special emphasis will focus on the opioid epidemic, in particular fentanyl, which can cause breathing issues and even death in the smallest amounts and can be purchased over the internet.
You can get a small envelope of fentanyl that can give out literally thousands of doses. So, you know, coming from China, and then the heroin is coming from Mexico, coming across the border. And the purity is low, as I say, price is high. I think that dynamic is going to change. I think, you know, we haven't seen this epidemic peak yet.
Law enforcement say that they must act soon because as the epidemic reaches its peak, many more people will lose their lives. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington. America's military might is in decline, and it has top officials worried about the military's future. Find out how President Trump plans to change all of that. Stay with us for more CBN News. Watch straight ahead. It only took 5 minutes for a hacker to break into the Pentagon's computer network through an Army recruitment website. The good news is that it wasn't a real security attack. It was a public demonstration to help expose the military's vulnerabilities. But as John Jessup explains, those weaknesses are symptoms of a much larger problem for the military. It's falling behind in developing the technology for modern weapons.
Dramatic provocations from North Korea and saber rattling in Russia and Iran are prompting the United States to break out its military might. That show of force includes firing cruise missiles into Syria, dropping the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, moving aircraft carriers to the Korean Peninsula, and the latest, a successful missile defense test. Yet, even with these apparent wins, defense experts are worried about America's military weaknesses. Does this stuff keep you up at night?
It does keep me up, but more importantly, it keeps up Pentagon leadership at night.
What worries top brass the most? Threats across multiple fronts.
That's the challenge right now. What we're optimized to handle is sort of the Cold War environment, where you have a singular threat.
War in the 21st century no longer relies on conventional weapons and strategy.
If we're talking about electronic warfare, Russia is eating our lunch.
Mackenzie Eagland studies defense strategy for the American Enterprise Institute. She told CBN News the military lost its edge with the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Here we are winding down from the wars of the last decade and finding that the rest of the world did not slow down. In fact, they're catching up or surpassing us.
How much are you concerned about lack of resources, outdated equipment, or not having enough equipment?
Very much so. And it's exacerbated by the fact that we've been at war for 15 years. So a lot of our equipment and material has just been worn out. It's been worn out by years of war. Some of it to the point that it's not even worth bringing it home.
While the U.S. spends more than any other country on defense, the amount has dropped by 20% since 2010 due to spending caps mandated by law. Meanwhile, China and Russia have only increased their military spending.
We also have to be a little bit nervous when their budget is growing 10 to 20 billion every year, and ours is coming down 20 to 30 billion every year.
President Trump wants to change that with a multi-billion-dollar increase for the Pentagon, though many say it's not enough.
$54 billion is not going to fix the problems of a military that's already been shrunk to pre-World War II levels. But it's a good start.
A lot of the root of our degradation of capabilities comes from budget uncertainty. So making sure that we can put a budget deal together that gives the military the ability to future plan in the long term will also really support long-term capabilities.
Experts and defense hawks both agree the cuts have hurt the military in more areas than troop levels and hardware. Eaglin points to China, which has taken the lead in next-generation space and missile technology. It includes the development of hypersonic missiles that travel more than a mile per second. Army commanders call them a game changer and acknowledge it would be nearly impossible to defend against them. Another loss in leadership? Research and development. In the past, military ideas drove commercial revolution within the American economy, giving the public the internet, GPS, mobile phones, and more.
Everything from plastic bags to pantyhose are from the U.S. military or derivative from research and development. The federal government is no longer the driver in research and development in our U.S. economy. It is now led by the commercial sector. The problem with that is if the Defense Department wants access to it, everybody has access to it.
That means the military must now line up with everyone else to learn from the business world, using products like tablets for airstrikes and Xbox controllers for drones. All of this paints a disaster scenario, as was recently illustrated by a former Pentagon planner. In a series of 16 different war games designed to see whether the US and NATO could defend the Baltic states against Russia, the US lost every one.
So what does all of this mean for the US military? Analysts say the loss of technological advantage will lead to failed missions, higher casualties, and longer wars. It's a gap the US must fill now before it's too late. John Jessup, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, hope for invisible victims of sex trafficking. See how this former victim of trafficking is stepping up, along with her husband. The story's next. Up to 300,000 underage girls are sold for sex every year in America. Men and boys are also targets for sex traffickers, but help for them can be quite scarce. Now, one couple in North Carolina is planning to open the first safe house in the U.S. just for boys who've been victims of sex trafficking. Travel now to North Carolina to learn more about the Anchor House. Here's Charlotte Neer.
Each year, more than 300 lured with the promise of money, shelter, or attention. Each year, a pimp can exploit an average of 4 to 6 girls, usually between the ages of 12 and 14, and make from $150,000 to $200,000 per child. Rescue efforts tend to focus on girls, leaving boys as invisible victims in the sex industry. A study by the John Jay School of Criminal Justice found that young males made up nearly half of commercially exploited children in New York City. Until recently, no long-term recovery safe homes existed within the United States for boys. That changed thanks to Chris and Anna Smith. They began a ministry called Restore One, with initial plans to open a home for sex-trafficked girls. Anna, once a victim herself, had interned at a safe house for girls. Then they heard of the growing unmet need to help boys.
It was a panel of survivors talking about their programs and talking about, just the need and the things that the people they were working with were walking through. And one stood up and started to say, like, I have boys coming to my drop-in center all the time. And there are no safe homes for boys. There needs to be someone to step up and do a safe home for boys. At that moment, Chris and I turned around, just like looked at each other.
The Smiths answered that need with the Anchor House, a first-of-its-kind shelter aimed at providing refuge and restoration for adolescent boys.
We're a long-term care facility, restorative care facility, and our goal is to give that boy, as best as we can, a life that he deserves. And so here at the Anchor House, the counseling, and there's a library, there's a game room, we have a cafeteria, a living room. So our goal is if to think about your boy or your girl, whatever they're involved in, that's our goal. So homeschooling, to get them caught back up in school. So our goal is to provide every care that we can for them to get them back on their feet.
Hannah fears that the number of boys trapped in this miserable existence is greater than people might think.
Our culture does not allow space for men to experience any type of harm. A man cannot be a victim. Men are perpetrators.
The project took only 6 months to complete, a task many believed impossible.
The Anchor House sits on 10 acres of land, and while the owners have received a ton of support from the community, there are some who don't think the safe house is a good idea.
Anna and I have been yelled at and called names and wrote about on all over social media. I'm not going to say that was easy to walk through. We pray for them, and we do love them, and maybe they don't see it today, but God is good, and His grace extends further than we could ever imagine.
Director Linda Royster, a licensed counselor, is aware that many of the boys who come here will need extensive healing.
To be violated perpetually, it may be hard for you and I to wrap our minds around that. But then these boys will come to us, these residents will come to us with a long history of abuse.
While the Anchor House is Christ-centered, any boy needing help will be welcomed.
We have a stance that we're not gonna force Christianity or the Christian faith upon anyone, but we're gonna let them know what it's like to feel the impact of it.
The Anchor House is set to open in January 2017. Until then, the Smiths look forward to giving the boys a home that helps them overcome their past to live free and fulfilled lives. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Yet another example of being the hands and feet of Jesus. Stay with us. There's much more CBN News Watch straight ahead. Christian leaders sponsored an unprecedented event in Mexico City this past weekend as 100,000 evangelists spread out across the city to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Gary Lane has this story.
Scenes like these are rarely seen in Mexico City. Tens of thousands of Christian evangelists from throughout Latin America took to the streets to share the gospel with anyone who would listen. Brazilian missionary Eunice DeSante was one of them.
I'm here because I am a soul hunter, and then I'm here to take people to meet Jesus. Jesus is everything that I have.
Following a day and night of evangelizing, the 1 Million for Jesus event concluded with a prayer rally and meeting at Azteca Stadium. Several CBN workers and leaders, including CBN International Vice President Ben Edwards, attended the event.
Azteca Stadium is such a famous stadium, and to see all of these leaders together worshiping Jesus, for CBN to be here, our desire as a ministry is always to bring unity to the body of Christ.
Edwards says CBN wants to be a blessing to Mexican believers and help transform the spiritual climate of the nation. DeSante said her husband died just 2 months ago. Despite the emotional hardship, she still wanted to join in the Mexico City outreach.
I have two choices: to be at home crying because my husband passed away, or come and teach about Jesus and preach about Jesus, that He's alive and well. This is a huge event to reach souls to Jesus. This is amazing.
Omaya Alvarez of the Dominican Republic explained the purpose of the concluding stadium event.
We are not here just to preach today. We have been preaching the gospel all over, in every corner, in every neighborhood, in every park of the city, and outside the city, in the countryside. So this is kind of celebration.
Attendees of the 1 Million for Jesus effort are praying that other Christians will be inspired to follow their lead and hold similar events throughout Latin America and around the world. Gary Lane, CBN News.
It is time now for your Thursday Thankful, and today I offer this prayer of gratitude. Father, a heart like yours is my desire. It is what I am longing for. Thank you for granting me this request. Bless your name this day and forevermore. With that word, make this a thankful Thursday. That is a wrap for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about always at cbnnews.com. You can also reach out to us by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.
At a national gathering of law enforcement officials, Attorney General Jeff Sessions spelled out his plan to turn back the troubling increase in violent crime.
To carry out the president's executive order, in February, we established our task force on crime reduction and public safety, which includes experts across our great Department of Justice. The task force is listening to ideas from partners like you all across this country, and it is developing a complete strategy to tackle these issues, including proposals for legislation.
The Attorney General announced a new initiative to combat crime and bolster public safety by providing federal resources to help out 12 cities strategize on the best ways to fight crime.
I expect them to prioritize violent crime cases, identify the most violent people in their jurisdictions, and work with their state and local counterparts to take them off the streets. To support their efforts, we will hire 300 more assistant United States attorneys who will serve on the front lines in your districts.
This national public safety partnership will start in 12 cities and eventually expand. They include Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Birmingham, Alabama, Buffalo, New York, Cincinnati, Ohio, Houston, Texas, Indianapolis, Indiana, Jackson, Tennessee, Kansas City, Missouri, Lansing, Michigan, Memphis, Tennessee, Springfield, Illinois, and Toledo, Ohio. The Attorney General says federal and local law enforcement will work side by side with a concentration on gun crime, drug trafficking, and gang violence. Special emphasis will focus on the opioid epidemic, in particular fentanyl, which can cause breathing issues and even death in the smallest amounts and can be purchased over the internet.
You can get a small envelope of fentanyl that can give out literally thousands of doses. So, you know, coming from China, and then the heroin is coming from Mexico, coming across the border. And the purity is low, as I say, price is high. I think that dynamic is going to change. I think, you know, we haven't seen this epidemic peak yet.
Law enforcement say that they must act soon because as the epidemic reaches its peak, many more people will lose their lives. Eric Rosales, CBN News, Washington.
Church leaders teamed up in this room at the National Press Club to voice their concerns over the proposed budget cuts. Christian leaders from across the country flew into D.C. to meet with lawmakers on Capitol Hill to talk about the budget proposal, opposing cuts to programs like community block grants and SNAP, the former food stamp program. They're concerned the cuts would hurt people who are poor, hungry, sick, and vulnerable.
Care for those most in need is not an optional part of Christian faith.
Many of us have called this budget immoral and unjust. I would also say that it is mean, it is callous, it is cruel, and yes, it is devastating in the impacts it would have.
Men and women of faith right here behind me say they are willing to stand with the nation's leaders to work on budget proposals as well as healthcare reform that protect poor people and the vulnerable.
We're going for a break for a second.
And now during the Kia Summers on Us sales event, you won't have to make any payments for 5 months.
Like the sound of that.
My decision about how long I stay is not up to them.
44 counties are projected to have no choice at all, meaning, yet again, Americans could be thrown off their plans in states like Missouri and Ohio and Wisconsin. Does it sound like Obamacare is working? Now Democrats tell us it'd be wrong for the Senate to actually address these problems in a serious way, while the law they've defended for 7 years teeters, literally teeters on the edge of total collapse. They were wrong before, they're wrong again now. Because Obamacare isn't working by nearly any measure, it has failed, and no amount of 11th hour reality denying or buck passing by Democrats is going to change the fact that more Americans are going to get hurt unless we do something. I regret that our Democratic friends made clear early on that they did not want to work with us in a serious bipartisan way to address the Obamacare status quo. But Republicans believe we have a responsibility to act, and we are, for our constituents, for our states, and for our country. We've long called for a better way forward, and we've been engaged in intensive talks on how to get there. Through dozens of meetings open to each and every member of the conference, we've had the opportunity to offer and consider many ideas for confronting the Obamacare status quo. We debated many policy proposals. We considered many different viewpoints. In the end, we found that we share many ideas about what needs to be achieved and how we can achieve it. These shared policy objectives and the solutions to help achieve them are what made up the healthcare discussion draft that we finished talking through this morning. We agreed on the need to free Americans from Obamacare's mandates, and policies contained in the discussion draft will repeal the individual mandate so Americans are no longer forced to buy insurance they don't need or can't afford. We'll repeal the employer mandate so Americans no longer see their hours and take-home pay cut by employers because of it. We agreed on the need to improve the affordability of health insurance, and policies contained in the discussion draft will do that. It will eliminate costly Obamacare taxes that are passed on to consumers so we can put downward pressure on premiums. Expand tax-free health savings accounts and deploy targeted tax credits so we can help defray out-of-pocket costs, and shift power from Washington to the states so they have more flexibility to provide more Americans with the kind of affordable insurance options they actually want. We agree on the need to stabilize the insurance markets that are collapsing under Obamacare as well, and policies contained in the discussion draft will implement stabilization policies so we can bring financial certainty to insurance markets and hope to Americans who face the possibility of limited or zero options next year under Obamacare, and ultimately transition away from Obamacare's collapsing system entirely so more Americans will not be hurt. We also agree on the need to strengthen Medicaid, preserve access to care for patients with pre-existing conditions, and allow children to stay on their parents' health insurance through the age of 26. I'm pleased that we were able to arrive at a draft that incorporates input from so many different members who represent so many different constituents who are facing so many different challenges. The draft containing the solutions I mentioned, along with many others, is posted online, and I encourage everyone to carefully review it. There will be ample time to analyze, discuss, and provide thoughts before legislation comes to the floor. And I hope every senator takes that opportunity. Next week, we expect the Congressional Budget Office to release a score. After that, we will proceed with a robust debate and an open amendment process here on the Senate floor, a process that I would encourage each of our 100 senators to participate in. When legislation does come to the floor, it will present Senate Democrats with another opportunity to do what's right for the American people. They can choose to keep standing by as their failing law continues to collapse and hurt more Americans. but I hope they will join us instead to bring relief to the families who've struggled under Obamacare for far too long. Either way, it's time to act, because Obamacare is a direct attack on the middle class, and American families deserve better than its failing status quo. They deserve better care. That's just what we're going to continue to work to bring them.
All right, you're listening right there to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell speaking on the floor just as the Senate floor is coming to order. Beginning its business of the day as they're announcing the Senate has released and revealed it's the long-awaited discussion draft, their version of how to overhaul Obamacare. That released just moments ago. Also hearing just moments ago from Nancy Pelosi addressing many topics, hitting this new discussion draft and other topics which we will get to. This is what we would consider a kind of live event palooza type of day, because we're also now standing by to hear from President Trump. We have just learned that President Trump at his event will be happening any moment now, will be addressing and discussing this version of the healthcare plan. We'll see what the president has to say. As we know, White House officials were briefed last night on the details. All right, let's get to it right now. MJ Lee is here, as well as Rick Newman of Yahoo Finance. MJ, you've been reading through all 100 and how many? Trying 142. Yeah, exactly. Speed reading through 140 plus pages. What are the big headlines right now?
Well, first of all, it's significant that we actually now have a bill to try to read through. Of course, this was a big, area of contention that even Senate Republicans felt frustrated that they hadn't seen the bill in its full form until today. Now we actually have a name for the bill. It's called the Better Care Reconciliation Act of 2017, not the same name as the House Republican bill, of course. And here are the big headlines, and very similar to what we have been reporting since yesterday when some of the details started to come out. It repeals the individual mandate, same as the House bill, gets rid of the Obamacare taxes on the Medicaid front, which of course is one of the biggest parts of the debate going forward. It does gradually phase out Medicaid expansion more slowly than the House bill, but there will be drastic changes to the Medicaid program overall in that states will get certain amounts of money, but those funding actually will be cut back drastically. We also have more state flexibility to waive Obamacare regulations and a one-year block of federal funding for Planned Parenthood. Again, all more or less in line with what we have been reporting. The big question, of course, Kate, as we get more of these details and as Senate Republicans get a chance to look through the bill, is whether they feel like they got enough of what they asked for to actually vote yes on this bill, or whether they feel like some of these details are enough hang-ups that they are not willing to actually go there and vote yes.
And what Republican moderates want is, in some levels, very different from what more conservative senators want. We were seeing that already as we were leading up to this moment play out. We'll have to wait. They're reacting because they're reading it in real time, as we are as well. Before I get to you, Rick, let me actually go to Capitol Hill. Phil Mattingly is standing by there. Phil, give me your take.
Well, look, I think what you're seeing right now is what Senate leadership is trying to do is thread the needle, and MJ kind of laid out the details very well. And the question is, if those details will get them to 50. That's really kind of been the end game the entire time. It seems simplistic, but the really only goal in what they're trying to draft right now is how do you get 50 of your 52 members to vote for this bill? And you see kind of things being given to both sides of the ideological spectrum. On the Medicaid expansion, changing the phase out, making it more gradual is helpful.
Bill, I'm going to have to cut you off, my friend. I'm so sorry. Let's go to the top Democrat in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. He's speaking on the Senate floor right now.
Give these folks another, even larger tax cut in their tax bill. Even though much of the early reporting says the bill will keep certain protections for Americans with pre-existing conditions, the truth is it may well not guarantee them the coverage they need. By allowing states to waive essential health benefits, what the bill is saying to those Americans is insurance still has to cover you, but it doesn't have to cover what you may actually need. It doesn't have to cover all or even most of your costs. If you need treatment for opioid addiction, your plan may no longer cover it. If you're pregnant and need maternity care, your plan may have decided that's too expensive. The coverage that Americans with pre-existing conditions actually need may well become either unaffordable or even non-existent under this bill. Simply put, this bill will result, not right now, at the end of my remarks. Simply put, this bill will result in higher costs